Hello, and welcome to Quadratics Lesson number 1. So, we're going to be using these Cornell notes to go over this lesson. You don't need the Cornell notes with you. They will be available on the Google class site if you'd like to print them out and fill it in. But you can also just write the important information in a notebook. This is the first lesson, so let's get started. So, a quadratic, right? This lesson is on quadratics, so we are talking about quadratics. A quadratic function is an equation where the highest exponent is 2. So if you're circling all the quadratic equations, so you look for the highest exponent is 1, so that's not 1. The highest exponent is 2, so that's a quadratic. The highest exponent is 3, so that's not 1, that's a cubic. And this one with the 1, that's linear. The highest exponent here is 2, so that's also a quadratic. So to solve for a quadratic equation means to solve for x. You're going to tell me what x equals. The solutions to a quadratic equations are also called roots, zeros, and solutions. Alright, before we moved on, I changed these to types in case you can't read my handwriting. So a quadratic function is an equation where the highest exponent is 2. Solutions to a quadratic equations are also called roots, zeros, and solutions. So we're going to learn how to solve these by hand first. And you will need to show me how to solve them by hand. So to solve a quadratic equation, it must be set equal to 0. So this is really important. It's got to be equal to 0. For instance, this one, x squared minus 12 equals negative 4x. You got to set it to equal to 0. So instead of equal to this, it needs to equal to 0. So that means we have to move this to the other side. So what's the opposite of negative 4x? The opposite of negative 4x is plus 4x. And if you do it to one side, you have to do plus 4x to both sides. So over here you have x squared minus 12 plus 4x equals 0. Because we move this cancels and becomes 0. And you have x squared minus 12 plus 4x. X squared minus 12 plus 4x. So you always have to set them to equal to 0 first. And once this equation is set to equal 0, you have to factor it. I'm going to open up a new screen and just review how to factor this equation by hand. Alright, so the first thing you should notice that this is not in standard form. Standard form, remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. This is not in standard form. We need to move this over. So I'm going to rewrite it in proper standard form, which is that, right? This is standard form. This is not. So I'm going to erase this. This is standard form. And we know that the first thing we have to do when we factor quadratics, trinomials, is see if there's a GCF. In this case, since this is 1, 4, and negative 12, there is no GCF. The GCF is 1, right? Because there's no number here, so we don't have to do that. So now we make our x. We multiply a times c and put that here. So a, which is 1, times negative 12 is negative 12, and we put 4 down here. So we need to find numbers that will multiply to this 12 and that also add to this 4. So we're going to write all the factors of 12. So we have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. We know one of them has to be negative because this is negative 12, so one of these have to be negative. But since this one is positive, we know that the biggest number is going to end up being positive. So this is either negative, this is negative, or this is negative. And we should be able to tell that negative 2 times 6 is negative 12, and negative 2 plus 6 is positive 4. This is the hardest part about factoring, but if you write these out and you look at this to see what they have to equal, you should be able to figure it out. It might take you a couple minutes to figure it out, but this is the hardest part of the factoring. So since I know these are my answers, I'm going to put negative 2x and 6x. Now I'm ready to do the box. So I have my box. I always put this here in this upper left box. I always put this one here in the lower right box. And then these two numbers that I found can go in either one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to put the negative 2x here, and I'm going to put the 6x here. And now you're factoring. I factor this way. So the x squared and 6x. You can factor out 1x. The factor of negative 2x and negative 12, this one's negative, so it has to be negative 2. And then going this way, x squared and negative 2x, it'll just be x. And going this way, 6x and negative 12, the GCF is 6. So I'm going to scroll down. So once you get these are our binomials, this one and this one. So our two binomials are x minus 2 and x plus 6. So that is it factored. And we can multiply to see if we get the right answer. Put it back in a box or however way you want to multiply. But this is our final answer. So we factored this, and this is our answer. So I'm going to go back and put that in. All right, so now we set it equal to 0, then we factored it, and we got this example. Now the next thing is you set each binomial. You set each binomial equal to 0. So for instance, this would be x minus 2 equals 0, and x plus 6 equals 0. And then you solve each factor for x. So to solve this for x, I would just move the 2 over. I would do plus 2. So I would have x equals 2. To solve this one for x, I would move the 6 over, minus 6. And I would get x equals negative 6. So my answers would be x equals 2 and x equals negative 6. Those are my solutions, or my zeros or roots. Solutions, zeros, or roots. All right, so let's go to Desmos, and I'm going to put in this original problem into Desmos. We know we just did it by hand and we got this answer, but now I'm going to go to Desmos. So here's the best thing about Desmos is you can do the original problem. As I don't even have to do it where it's solved for 0. I can just put the original problem in Desmos. Go back here. The original problem, x squared minus 12 equals negative 4x. And that's what I put. X squared minus 12 equals negative 4x. So remember, quadratics are called solutions. Roots are zeros. And you remember what a 0 is. It's where the line crosses your x-axis. So this line that we put in crosses. I'm going to make it go away by hitting this. See, this is that line. Crosses at negative 6 and it crosses at 2. So if I go back to my work, my answers that I got are 2 and negative 6. So yes, you don't have to do any of this work. All you have to do is put the original problem into Desmos, and Desmos will show you the answer. Right? There it is. 6, -6, and 2. But I want you to do all this work, and then you can use Desmos to verify your answer. And on the math spaces, you don't have to show me your work. You can just put it in Desmos, and Desmos will give you the answer. We're going to do another problem or two where I'm going to do it by hand, and it'll be a good review for factoring by hand and understanding quadratics. All right, so here's another example. Here's another problem. It's 2 problems. We're going to do this one over here. The first thing you have to do is get it to equal to 0. This doesn't equal to 0. So I'm going to have to move that -5 over to the other side. Right? I need this to equal 0. So the opposite of -5 is +5. +5. So I'm going to have x squared minus 11x plus 24 equals 0. Now I have it to equal to 0, so now I can factor it. So the first thing you do is you draw this x, you multiply a times c, which in this case is 24. Down here you have -11. So we need 2 numbers that multiply to 24, but that add to -11. So I'm going to write down all my factors of 24. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. I did forget to see if there's a GCF, but remember the GCF, when this is a 1, there is nothing, no GCF. So which 2 of these will multiply to 24 and add to -11? So since this is negative, either the bigger one's negative or they're both negative. And in this case, we can see that these both have to be negative. Right? -8 times -3 is positive 24, and -8 plus -3 is -11x. Again, this is the hardest part, but this is why I want you to practice this to get used to solving it and finding these 2 numbers. So I'm going to draw my box. I know that in the upper left this goes there, and in the lower right this one goes there. Don't make a mistake and accidentally put this one, right? We're working on this, not this one. So that's the 24 that goes down in here. And then my 2 numbers, I found that one of them was -3x and the other one was -8x. I put those anywhere here. I'm going to put -3x here and -8x here. Then I'm going to find the GCF going this way, which is just x. X squared and -8x is x. And the GCF going this way, since this is on the outside, this is negative. And the GCF of -3x and 24 is 3. Now I find a GCF going this way, which is just x. X squared and -3x is just x. And then going this way, -8x and 24. This is negative, so it's going to be -8. And those are my 2 binomials. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And I have then I factored it. X minus 3 and x minus 8. Now I set each side to 0. I set this side to 0. And I solve for x, which is a 1-step equation. How do you move -3 over? You add it. So your answer is going to be 3. How do you move -8 over? You add it. So my 2 answers are x equals 3 and x equals 8. That's my solution or my root or my zeros. This is my answer. So I'm going to go back to Desmos and check to see if I get 3 and 8. I'm going to put in this original problem. I'm not even going to do it here. I'm going to put in the original one. Alright, so I have the original problem in Desmos, and I'm going to look at this quadratic, and I'm going to look to see where it crosses the x. It crosses the x at 3 and at 8. So I go back to this one, and the answers I got are 3 and 8, so I know I did it right. Again, as you can tell, to solve this using Desmos, all you have to do is put this in Desmos, and it'll solve it for you. You don't have to do any of this work. But for my purposes, you're going to have to show me your work on some of these. Again, on the math space, you won't have to show me your work. Alright, hopefully you've copied this down. I'm going to erase it, and I'm going to do example 3. Alright, let's do example 3. We just did this one. So again, I got to get it to equal to 0. Right now it equals 5, so I got to move this 5 over by subtracting 5 from both sides. So that's going to give me 3r squared minus 16r minus 12 and equals 0. Now when I factor this part, I need to make sure there's no GCF, greatest common factor, between the numbers 3, 16, and 12. So now I'm going to use Desmos for that. So I go back to Desmos. I'm going to hit the calculator, keypad I mean. I'm going to hit functions, I'm going to hit miscellaneous, and then GCD. And I'm going to put in the 3 numbers, 3, 16, and 12. So 3, 16, 12. So my GCF is 1, so there's nothing I can take out of here. They don't have a greatest common factor. So that's good to know, so I can go back and I can start factoring it. I'm going to put in my x. I'm going to multiply a times c, and I get negative 36. And then my b goes down here at negative 16. So I need 2 numbers that multiply to negative 36 and that add to negative 16. So I'm going to find all my factors of 36. 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. So we need them to multiply to this, which all of them do, but we need them to add to negative 16. Since it's negative, the big one's probably going to be negative. So it looks like this one, right? 2 times negative 18 is negative 36, and 2 plus negative 18 is negative 16. So 2x on this side and negative 18x on this side. And now I can write my box. And remember, this one always goes here. This one always goes in the top left, and this one always goes in the bottom right. And then it doesn't matter where you put these. I'm going to put 2x here, and I'm going to put negative 18x here. Technically, these should be r's. But whatever. So I'm going to factor going this way. So 3x squared and negative 18x, the GCF is 3x. GCF going this way of 2x and negative 12 is going to be 2. GCF going this way, 3x squared and 2x is just x. And the GCF going this way, negative 18x and negative 12 is just negative 6. Because this is negative, this also has to be negative. Alright, so I have my binomials. My 2 binomials are 3x plus 2. And then this one, x minus 6. And now to solve them, I set each one equal to 0. 3x plus 2 equals the 0. X minus 6 equal to 0. And then I solve for x. So subtract 2. 3x equals 2 negative. divided by 3. X equals negative 2/3. And then this one, x minus 6 equals 0. I just have to add the 6 to both sides. And x equals 6. So the answers I got were x equals negative 2/3 and x equals 6. So let's check Desmos and see if we're right. I'm going to put in the original problem, this problem, in a Desmos. Just also remember, when you're using Desmos, it can't be an r, it has to be an x. So I'm going to put in 3x squared minus 16x minus 7 equals 5. Alright, I put the quadratic in. I look at my zeros and I have negative 0.667 and 6. Remember how I told you how to change this to a fraction? Just put that in there, negative 0.667. If you hit this button to change it into a fraction, it's going to be crazy because this is a repeating fraction. I've already went over this. You just keep on adding 6's until you get a fraction. See how I keep on adding 6's, and now I have an actual fraction, negative 2/3. So this one is negative 2/3 and this one is positive 6. So let's go back and see if that was the answer we got. Negative 2/3 and positive 6. So we did it correctly. These are the solutions, or the zeros, or the roots for that quadratic. Alright, I know that was a lot of a longer video than normal, but it's very important that you remember how to factor by hand. Really, if you can factor by hand, then you can do this. But again, Desmos will give you the answer. So on math spaces, use Desmos, but on the worksheets you have to turn in, you're going to have to factor it by hand. All right, you'll have a good one.